Today I will be talking about In the Shadow of the Fall. This is a fantasy novella duology, so this book was around 160 pages, and the next one is also going to be a short book. Of course, don't know how long it's going to be yet, but this is the first half of this great fantasy story about this cosmic war that is going on that is inspired by African mythology. I had a great time with this story. Also, I think the cover is absolutely gorgeous. That's one of the reasons I requested it on NetGalley. On top of the description sounded amazing, so I did request this on NetGalley and got a advanced reader copy through them. This will be coming out in July, and I definitely recommend it if this sounds interesting to you. In this story, we're following two characters. We're following both our protagonist and our antagonist, which definitely heightens the intrigue and the suspense around this story. So we're following our protagonist, who is an acolyte at the temple, and she has been passed over year after year for the priesthood. She has to be chosen by the Orisha, or the gods in this world, to ascend to priesthood, and they haven't spoken to her. She hasn't heard from them, and she is getting disappointed and frustrated at being passed over yet again. So in our first scene from her, she sneaks out and attempts to call an Orisha and bind it to her so that way she can ascend to priesthood by saying, "Hey, they chose me, they're talking to me." Unbeknownst to her, this is an especially dangerous ritual. Not only is she not prepared, she does not have the skills to do this, but for her in particular, because she is quite literally set in the middle of a cosmic war that is going on. And we see that as we switch to our antagonist, who is walking around and killing people and stealing their bodies so that way he can walk into any situation. He can quite literally overpower anyone and then pop up anywhere because he looks like the person whose body he just stole. And that continues to happen throughout the story. He pops up in unexpected places, which continues to heighten the tension of this story as this war is brewing and we're getting to see more and more about it. I am always fascinated by how much world building is packed into short little books like this, because we get to see a lot of the history of the gods. We get to hear the stories of them, the different stories that different people think about the gods. We get to see how different people live their lives. Despite the fact that we don't actually travel to very many locations in this book, the world feels expansive. It feels real and lived in because we hear of things in far off, even if we might not see them. And then we get to hear about the gods and their interactions with the humans and the different stories humans have about the gods. So it just feels like so much more than what we are presented with in the story. Of course, our protagonist, as she is disappointed yet again by failing to ascend to priesthood, she is wrestling with what she believes about the gods, and if she believes that there's no place for her in the temple. And she does end up leaving the temple. And despite our protagonist's turmoil being mostly internal as she's wrestling with these things, the story moves at a very fast pace, and we do see, it feels like a lot of external action as well. Our protagonist leaves and the only world that she knows and goes out and encounters other people and dangers outside the temple in a world that she has not been in previously. And that is where she comes across the griots. The griots are a community of nomadic people, and they are probably my favorite part of this story. The griots are very welcoming to outsiders like our protagonist, and several of the griots are outsiders in their own communities. In addition, they have this magical storytelling power where when they tell stories, you are swept up in the story and you feel like you are actually there. It is as if you are experiencing the story as a participant, as someone who is actually in the story. So whenever they start telling the story, the world around you vanishes and is replaced with the world of the story that they are telling. I would have loved to spend an entire book with the griots. They are such an interesting, fascinating people, and it was great to get to see their way of life for the short amount of time that we did get to see it. As I said, our protagonist is really wrestling with her faith with what she believes about the gods, and she leaves the temple and starts to hear different stories about the gods and is continuing to wrestle with those feelings. And there was definitely one scene where it just was like so emotionally powerful. The feelings, like everything she's feeling is just like bubbling to the surface. This story does pull heavily from African mythology and legend, and a lot of the gods referred to in this story are stories from African mythology and legends. And our character is going on a religious journey, and there is a lot of religious language used around our main character, surrounding her journey, you know, her internal feelings. And I feel like this might land differently for readers depending on where they are in their journey or their personal experiences with religion, especially as our character is asked at times to believe things without evidence. This is only the first half of the story, so we don't get all the answers in this story. We do get most of the answers to the primary questions that are asked throughout this story, but we definitely have some loose ends, and we know there's a bigger threat to come, as big of a threat as our antagonist was in this story and how he just kept cropping up at unexpected times. We know he's not the biggest bad out there, and there is more to come, and that is what we are left on in this story, and I cannot wait to get the next story and read the conclusion to this fascinating duology. If any of this sounds interesting, definitely check it out, and I hope to see you in another video. Happy reading!